Hey folks, welcome back to Go GitHub Pages. This is the second video in the series. We're going to cover static web, static site generators, Jekyll, and how that fits in with GitHub Pages. Then we're going to jump into creating a blog on GitHub Pages with a little bit of content just to see how it all works. We're going to keep using the GitHub web interface to do all of our editing and creating files. So if you need a refresher on that, you can jump back to the first video in this series because we'll go a little bit quicker this time. A lot to get to, so let's get started. We're on the Jekyll section of the website right now if you're following along, and we'll move into the blog in just a bit. So we're going to start out talking about the static web. So unlike Drupal or WordPress, GitHub Pages is not a content management system. It's not a dynamic web application. It's just a static host. There's no database available. There's no server-side processing language. You're not going to get an admin interface. So this is known as a static web host. The HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript that's stored in that repository are going to be served up to the user without dynamic changes. So you can think of a static site almost like a shared folder of files that are read-only and exposed on the web. In the old days, that was just the way the web was. It's the normal way of creating a website. But dynamic, database-driven websites have really dominated in the last decade. So the pinnacle example of that, of course, is social media, where these huge databases are driving dynamic web applications with all kinds of features like user authentication, live comments, and personalized streams, always updating. All that complex functionality really requires a lot of heavy infrastructure on your server, a lot of processing going into it, which may not be necessary for your average site, especially not a simple site like the one that we're looking at today. Despite those limitations of a static site, they're really experiencing a new boom in recent years as a viable alternative because they do offer some advantages over all that heavy infrastructure. You have really fast performance, really minimal hosting requirements. You don't need any fancy server. There's no dependencies. The development environment is very simple. There's very low security vulnerabilities because there's no software running on the server. There's no server-side programming language that can get hacked. And it's very easy for version control because everything in a static site is plain text. So to make your life a little bit easier, if you're going the static route, you can use a tool called the Static Site Generator. And these are pieces of software that bundle together a whole stack of web development packages that can transform a directory of source code into a complete website that you can deploy on your server. So there's a lot of growing interest in these kind of tools because there's a boom in approaches such as the Jamstack. There's hundreds of static site generators that have sprung up on the scene, and you can browse some of the lists here at the Jamstack Site Generators or Static Site Generators website. And these are different tools than, like WordPress. Instead of a web application, these are a piece of software that you can install on your computer, and you're going to have a command line interface. It's not GUI. There's usually a built-in development server, so you can test out your website on your local machine without any test infrastructure. There's very simplified markup based content, so you're going to write stuff in Markdown, and that's going to get injected into your site. Web templating languages, so you can build your whole site out of modular parts, CSS preprocessors, file-based data options, and plugins, all things to just try to help you make your site and build it out using modular components. So the most popular static site generator is probably Jekyll. It's really actively developed. A lot of people use it in part because it's directly integrated with GitHub Pages. So that's what we're going to use today. It was originally focused on just creating a simple blog out of Markdown files, but it's really developed into a fully featured generator that you can use in any kind of type of web project, from tiny to really huge. And there's a showcase here where you can go and take a look at some of the examples. And Jekyll is written in the programming language Ruby, and it can be installed on your own computer as a Ruby gem. However, you really don't need to know anything about Ruby to get started using it. And like today, we're going to be doing it, using it via GitHub Pages, so you don't have to have anything installed. You don't really have to know anything about how Jekyll works under the hood. So once you have it set up and you have GitHub Pages activated, Jekyll's already there, ready to work for you. So if you put in some Jekyll source code, it's going to be transformed into a complete website and deployed on the static server after every time you commit. So a Jekyll project is really just a folder of files. So it's going to match up to our folder of our repository on GitHub. And it's going to have a set of folders inside of it. There's going to be things like the assets, underscore data, underscore includes, underscore layouts, your posts, and a config.yaml, and an index.md. So the content is mainly going to be written in Markdown, like the index.md, or your posts, which are going to be Markdown files inside of this posts folder. The theme, kind of the presentation layer of your website, and all of the nav and all these things that are wrapped around your content are going to be included in the includes folder, the layouts, and the SAS directories. And those are going to be a bunch of little modular components that flesh out that template of every web page. And so what I'm calling the theme in this workshop. Jekyll is going to knit together your content and the theme, and then build out your complete website. You don't need to start from scratch on that theme. There's lots of pre-made themes out there that will jumpstart your Jekyll project. So that's what we're going to do today. A Jekyll theme is basically just a set of pre-packaged templates and styles. So basically a theme is just going to look like this, a folder of files. And you can reference that in your configuration so it pulls the theme from somewhere else. Or you could just take all those files and put it into your own repository and set them up in that way. One thing you'll note, you'll see all these underscores in front of the file names and folder names. If there's an underscore in front of it, it's just pointing out that it's a special file for Jekyll. So make sure you get those right when you're writing out those file names. So let's move on to the next section here, blog of the website. And we're going to start setting up our new blog on GitHub, configuring it, and then writing some content just to see how this all works. So the first step is to hop over to GitHub again. So I'm back at my home, and we're going to create a new repository for our brand new blog. So again, go up to the plus button in the upper right-hand corner of the nav bar, and you're going to select New Repository to start this process. You're going to give it a web safe name again. So I'm going to say new dash blog example. So that's a nice all lowercase, no spaces. I'm just using a dash or underscores in this name. I'm going to leave it public. I'm going to click add a readme so that I'll be able to get started right away. And then this green button, create a repository, is going to create that new folder of files for me to start working in. First thing I'm going to do is go and activate GitHub Pages again. So I'm going to head over to the Setting tab on my repository, scroll way down to the GitHub Pages section. In the source selector, I'm going to select main, the root, and I'm going to click save to activate GitHub Pages. If I scroll down again, I can get the new URL for my site. There's nothing there yet, obviously. And then if I go and click code to go back to the home page, I like to just paste my URL here so I have it handy when I want to go look at that website once we get some content there. All right, we have a new repository set up for our blog. The first step is to set up our Jekyll project is to create a config.yaml file. This is going to contain all of the site-wide configuration options, variables, and settings. We're going to set up some variables such as like title, and those are going to populate all the template elements throughout your final website. So if we take a look back at our website, you're going to see that these areas are kind of content, but on every page of our website we have the same title, we have the same nav elements, we have the same footer elements. So those are the parts that are going to be populated by our theme, and we're going to have some variables to fill in some of those parts, like the title of the whole website and the title of these nav elements. So we're going to start out with config.yaml. Let's go to add a file here, and if you click that button, create a new file, we're going to create a file called underscore config.yml. So YAML is a plain text data format. The extension is always .yml, and it's designed to be pretty easy to read and to write, yet it's going to provide us some advanced data structures very similar to XML or JSON. It's used in Jekyll for configuration, for page front matter, and for site data. Most of the options that we're going to end up being using are key value pairs. So they're going to look something like, let me scroll down here, a key will be a word and then a colon, a space, and then a value is just some string after it or a number. YAML is going to ignore any blank lines. It requires spaces rather than tabs. It's going to use indentation to represent some nesting. So you do have to take a little bit of care when you're creating these files to make sure that you're following the syntax correctly. But most of what we're going to do for Jekyll is pretty simple, so just follow along here. We're going to start. There's an example of the config that I have here on the website, so you can really just copy from that if you'd like. So I'm just going to highlight and copy it with Control C, and I'm going to Control V to paste that into the editor. And I'll show you some features here. The first thing you see here is a hash, space, and then some words. Now in Markdown that would be an H1, right? But in YAML that's actually a comment. So YAML is just going to ignore everything after that hash. And so that's really a helpful feature so that we can write some notes to ourselves about what's going on here. So I divided my config into two areas, the kind of site settings, the variables that I'm going to use in the template, and then the build settings, which are referencing kind of the theme and some other options for the theme. In this case, we just have one. So as I said, the blank lines are ignored, so I have a blank line here between these two sections, and just use them to, help organize your file and make it a lot easier to read. So our first key value pair on our YAML here is title, and then colon, and then there's a space, and then there's just a string here. And so you can just write your new blog title, and then this value is going to be referenced throughout our site as site.title, and we're going to be able to pull it in to all of the different templates. As I said, for example, on this site, this is the site.title, and it's going to be repeated on every page in the whole website. In this case, I looked at the documentation for minima, which is the theme that we're referencing here, to find out what kind of options are available. What variables is that theme actually looking for to pull into the template? And then I followed their example. So the next variable that we have here is author. So we have author colon, and then you're going to see that we did some indentation here. So it's two spaces, and then name colon, and then a string. And so what we have there is actually a kind of array. So we have the author key, and the author key has got two values inside of it. So you have a name and you have an email. So it's site author.name and site author.email, and then a description. So these are just some of the values that we might set up in a regular config.yaml to be used throughout our theme. Finally, we set down here, we use this option called remote theme. Now, remote theme option is really specific to GitHub Pages because it allows you to reference any theme that's hosted in a GitHub repository. So it follows the pattern of the username and the repository name. So this is going to be useful for GitHub Pages, so we can set a theme and use it. It's not so useful if you're working on your local machine. In most cases, that's going to actually look like this, using the key theme. And using the key theme, Jekyll will let you actually install that theme on your local machine and reference those files for your project. But we're going to use remote theme in this context. And the theme that we're going to use here is Minima, which is actually the default theme designed and used by Jekyll. So if you want to learn more about how to configure that theme, you actually will go over to the theme repository, which is linked here, and you'll look at that repository to learn more about the options that you have available to use, and you'll actually jump into the README because that's where they'll usually just document the information for you. But you can see it's just a whole set of files, and we're not going to actually include any of that into our project because we include it into our project just by referencing it here. So that is the basics of our configuration. This is all we need to set up the basic settings for our site. And so that means time to get down to the commit area and write a commit message. And I'm going to give it a message, click the green button to commit this new file. Okay, we have a configuration set up. The next thing that we're going to need in our website is a home page. So we're going to create a markdown stub for every page that we want to include on our website. And then that markdown stub will be built into an actual web page by Jekyll. And so it's going to take that stub and wrap it in the theme and then build out that final HTML. So we're going to create a new file here. So the add file button, create new file. And we're going to create a file called index.md, index markdown. And every file that we actually want Jekyll to process needs front matter. So front matter is written in YAML, and it looks like this. We do 1, 2, 3 dashes, press return, and then you can write some YAML in there. So I could do a hash for just a comment, and then I'm going to end the front matter with 3 dashes, 1, 2, 3, return. So now this little block of text that we've created is called the YAML front matter, and we can write YAML data in there. And we're going to use that to tell Jekyll how we want to treat this file. So importantly, in this case, we're going to need a layout for our home page. And Minima, when I went and looked at the documentation, has a specific layout for the home page. So I'm going to go and use the key value pair of layout. So I'll start typing that here inside this YAML front matter. Layout, colon, space, home. So that's the layout that Minima theme has available to create our home page. So we don't have to generate any content for it. This little YAML front matter is not going to be displayed anywhere on our page, our final page. It's just essentially the configuration for this page that's going to be passed into Jekyll to make the decisions of what happens in the theme being wrapped around this page. So we can create some content in Markdown if we want, but the home layout is actually already going to have the site title and also our post displayed on it by default. So we don't really need to write anything here, but I might just say, welcome to the new blog, and press return. So there'll be a paragraph that has one sentence there on my new blog. We'll go ahead and scroll down. Time to commit. Create a message. Create home page. Press the green button to commit that and put it in our history. Okay, moving on. We want a little bit more content inside of our site before we go take a look. We already got 3 commits in this repository, but let's do a couple more before we go and look at our new website. So the basic part of a blog is posts, and Jekyll has that concept built right into its structure. Markdown, you want to create Markdown stubs inside a folder called _posts, and that's going to flesh out all your content. And they're accessible by the date, by the tag, and by category. And these are all kind of just built-in categories and functions inside of Jekyll. So each one of your posts is going to have to actually follow a very specific file name structure. So the file name structure looks like this. Date, given year, dash, month, dash, day, and then a title, a dash title. And then give it the extension .md. So for example, we could say 2020-10-31-happyhalloween.md, and that would be a valid name for a post. And so you just have to follow that convention because Jekyll can actually pull the date out of your post name and also pull the title out of the post name. So let's create our first posts. We're going to go over again to our repository home, and we're going to go over here to add a file and create a new file. And this time we actually want to create a new folder that this post is going to live in, and so we need to create the folder first. So we're going to say _posts, and then you're going to follow that with a slash and see how that automatically starts creating that folder where we're going to put this new file. And now let's create a file name there. So we're going to do 2020 10 20 first post.md. So whatever date you want to put in there, and then dash on a title, and then .md is going to be your file name. So once you got your good post file name in there, you're going to click down into the editor. And the first thing we're going to need here, again, is front matter. Jekyll's not going to process any file that doesn't have some front matter in it. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3 dashes, return. I'm going to give it a layout again. So I'm going to say layout key, colon space, and it's going to be post is a type of layout that we're going to use. Press return. This time I'm going to give it a title. So I'll give it a title, and just flesh that out. We'll say my first post on Jekyll. And then we can give it a tag. So we'll say tags, colon, space, first, and markdown and example are going to be my tags. And we can also give it a category. So these are just variables that are built into Jekyll's processing that we can use to sort and group these different posts in different ways. So I'm going to put it in categories of demo. And then I'm going to do the 3 dashes, and that closes that front matter block. Again, this little front matter block is not going to be displayed on the page. It's just going to tell Jekyll some configuration options for this page. So the layout of that post is already going to contain a title on that final page, so we don't have to write an H1 at the top of this. The title's already going to be there based on this variable that we set up above in the front matter. So we'll just start off by writing a little bit of content. And you're going to write it in Markdown, which if you've gone through the first video of this series, you're already an expert on that. So I'm just going to paste some in here. I have a paragraph. So put your Markdown to use. Do some practice on that. I'm going to do a heading 2. I'm going to create some more paragraph here. And I'm just going to paste in some more of this example content that we created earlier, just to have some content in this post. And put a open space at the end. So I've got my inline formatting, I've got my link, I've got my lists, and it's time to commit this into our repository. So I'll create a message. And I'll click the green button to commit this into our repository. All right, so now we have this new folder here, posts, and we have a file inside that folder. Let's create one more post before we go and take a look at our site, just to keep that example going. So I went back to my home page. You can see that there's this folder posts. I'm going to add another file. So add file, create new file. I'm going to do underscore posts slash, that puts it into the folder. I'm going to create a new post file name. Again, I need to use the date. So 2020-10-22 second post.md, whatever the title you want to call it, .md for the extension. And then I'm going to put my cursor into that editor so I can start creating some content. Again, we need to start out with that YAML front matter, which starts with 3 dashes, has these key value pairs, so I'm giving it layout post again. I gave it a title, I gave it some tags, and then I closed that YAML front matter with 3 dashes once again. This time I'm going to go ahead and paste in another paragraph, and I wanted to show you how to put in an image into your Markdown. So I'm just going to copy this actually from the website. But an image looks really similar to adding a link. So to add an image, you put a exclamation point, and then you're going to put a square bracket, and inside the square bracket you're going to give the alt text. So every image on the web should really have a description of it in case the image can't load, or in case your user has images disabled, or is a non-sighted user who can't see images. So you want to describe what the image is. So this is the alt text, and just as a demo, and it's going to be a white cat. And then you want to put the link to that actual image file inside a parentheses. So I went over to Wikimedia Commons and I just found a black or a white cat image, and I got the link to that image. So here I don't even have to add an image into my repository. I can reference where it is somewhere else, and that'll get pulled into my web page. And here's the link actually I used where I found this cat image, and I wrote that just like a regular hyperlink. So you can see it's very similar to the syntax for adding an image. Some other features that you might want to add in to your Markdown, maybe you want a horizontal rule. Horizontal rule is basically just a line that goes across the page. So in Markdown, you just make a bunch of dashes and leave it on a blank line, or leave a blank line underneath it. You might want to do a block quote. That's going to be a pointy bracket this way, and if you keep going, that's what a block quote is going to look like. You can also create tables. So there's lots of little things that are built into Markdown to make writing this kind of content easier. So we'll start with a pipe character and a space, and this is going to be the header column or row in our table. And I'm going to separate it from the next cell in our table with another pipe. And I'm just going to keep going. And then I'm going to press return, and that's going to be our first row, our header column. If you want to make that into a header, you do a pipe space dash 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 space pipe, and I just do that for all of the cells that I've already set up. So you can see that I don't have to actually line up all these pipes together, but I have to have the same number per row. And then I can just start creating my table here. So, whatever is in our table. Each cell separated out by the pipes. And then a blank space underneath it. All right, so a little bit more Markdown demonstrated in this example post, and it's time to get down here and commit the file. And press the green button to add that into your repository. Okay, so now we have this posts directory. We have 2 posts inside of it following the correct file name convention. I'm going to click back on code or on the name of the repository to get back to the home page. And I'm going to go here and look again at the commits. And you're going to see that we have nice green checks. That means the Jekyll build process was successful. So we can go ahead back to the home page, and I have my URL following the username github.io and / the repository name. So I can go ahead and take a look at our website as it's shaping up so far. So you can see what we configured in the YAML as title has shown up here in the nav bar. This little bit of content that we wrote on index.html is showing up here at the top of the home page. My name and my email that I put into the config.yaml is showing up down here. The description of my site is showing up here in the footer. And then this list of posts is just magically appeared on my home page because we use that layout home option. Now I click on one of these links and I can see what one of my posts looks like. And so this is my second post, and you can see this image that's actually on Wikimedia Commons showing up inside my post, this link showing up. We have this table showing up really nicely. Maybe we want to go back to the home page and read the first post that I wrote. And again, here's our lists and all these example Markdown features. So we'll close that and head back over to our blog to keep going and create a little bit more content. So not everything is a post, and in a lot of cases, maybe you're not going to write any posts in a website. So I rarely am using the post directory you can just create pages. And so there's a number of different options that Jekyll provides for you. You can create the post directory, but that's totally optional. And it's really optimized to make it easy to write this blog-like content where you put the date and the title directly into that file name, and then it can kind of automatically populate it for you. Posts are actually a type of object in Jekyll called collections, and it's really a flexible option for creating all kinds of groups of contents that you can sort and iterate in a whole bunch of different ways using the built-in methods that Jekyll provides. However, in most cases, you're just going to use a lot of pages, which are just regular pages like we've already created in index.md. So let's create another page that is really important, and that's the About page for your site. So About page is another kind of convention where people always describe their site and what it's all about in about.html or About page on your site. So let's get it back over to the home page of your repository, and you're going to do add a file, create a new file, and we're going to create the About page. So we'll add the file name about.md to create that markdown file. Again, we're going to need some front matter on this file, so we're going to do 3 dashes, return. We're going to give it the layout :space page, which is another layout that is provided by Minima. We're going to do a title, :space about, and then we're going to close that YAML front matter block with 3 more dashes again. And so now in this About page, we go ahead and create some more content. However, we want to do that in Markdown. So again, go ahead and take a few minutes to practice writing some more Markdown and describe what this incredible new blog is all about. When you're done with that, scroll on down into your commit area and write your commit message. Click the green button to add this to repository. And there we are. We've got a new About page. And if we look at our commits, you can see that it's not instantly building for us. So we're going to have to wait for a minute for the About page to get completed. I'm still not getting a green check, but it should build out before too long here. And we can click on the link here to check when it gets built out. So I'm getting this little yellow square, which means that it's doing the build process currently, and it's not done yet. So this isn't an instantaneous process, especially when we've done several commits in a row on the same repository. So I finally got a green check. I should be able to go over to that site and do a refresh. There we go. Hard refresh to make sure that I've got the fresh version of the page rather than the cached version that's in my browser already. And you can see that there's a new link up here to About. So if I click on that, I can view that new page that we just wrote. And we still have we've got a pretty fleshed out little website already set up with all this great content built into it already. So go ahead and play around with this blog a little bit and navigate around those pages. Just try to see how these little bits of content that we create end up showing up on the website in different places, depending on how we set up that page and where we put it in the post directory, if we put it just in the root, and which layouts you use. So there's a lot more to learn, but this is all we're going to do in this section of the video workshop. So tune in to the next video workshop, which will be number 3, where we're going to go into customizing this theme, learning a little bit more about those other directories that Jekyll provides, and do some advanced things with the templating language called Liquid. So hope to see you back in just a little bit.